Hi, George. How are you doing today?
Hello, my three. I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. The week has been great so far. How has your week been?
You know what? It's early. It's Tuesday, but I got no complaints yet.
Nice. Okay, that's
Yeah,
awesome. And thank you for taking the time, to come on and give us your time of day and chat about your experiences. I know it's a time commitment, so I really appreciate you coming on.
of course, of course. I've listened to many a episodes, so I'm happy to be in the seat now.
Do you feel like it's a hot seat or do you feel more
A touch only because I've witnessed it, right? And also, anytime I've seen Elias in a seat before, Elias, I'm like, oh man, I'm sharing the same seat he's been in.
He is one of those people that we all look up to, so I totally get what you're feeling. But I was excited to jump on this call because I feel like your experience is very unique in the build in public space. I haven't come across anyone else who has that expertise, so I'm really excited to dive deeper into your experiences and learn from your journey as you share it.
Fun. All right.
Okay, awesome. Before we get started, why don't you give a short introduction about yourself and your experience? Because I feel like instead of me doing injustice, I would like let you have the stage and tell the listeners whatever you want to about your journey so far.
Cool. So I'm George, and pretty much I am simply put a video editor in its simplest terms, and I come from basically like 12 years of big brand and big agency work in Los Angeles. So I came up into the world of video editing through BMX, which is like, tricks on bikes. We'd film ourselves. I was fortunate to grow up with a group of friends who, many of which turned professional. So quickly, instead of filming, backyard at the skate park, it was like my friends were traveling and I was able to film for like DVDs and stuff, which was really fun. And then that led me to having some experience that got me a freelance job in Los Angeles that just skyrocketed me into all. I had an amazing mentor, and he brought me everywhere for a decade, which let me create videos for Disney parks, Meta, like CNN, Nickelodeon. We worked with Anthony Bourdain, not himself, but with CNN when he was at CNN, and just a bunch of companies. He was like just an amazing. He is an amazing person. He brought me around everywhere, and he turned me into a little kid, from a little kid to a veteran in the video editing world. And then today, I work exclusively with a video podcast, doing kind of what you mentioned, like helping brands develop a podcast that speaks and feels like themselves. And that company's called Cut the Pod, and that's what I'm building. So that's me.
Cut the Pod. I first of all love that name, and I also love the journey so far because there's range, right? You started with some of the biggest names under your mentor, and now you are working with individual creators. Having seen that range, what is the biggest difference between the two? I don't want to call it gigs because one was like 10 years of your life, but
Uh huh.
and this one you're just getting started. But in both the situations, what is the
Mm.
biggest differences and what are the most unexpected similarities?
That's such a good question. It's like the biggest differences is going to be like when you're working with like the big brands. You're usually like your direct connection's a producer, and so like you're trying to please the producer, but every single time you submit a video for review, you're going through creative. Like a creative team has to like it. The
Hmm.
creative team likes it. Now the legal team needs to make sure there's nothing that is a bad thing that you've done that will get them in trouble.
Yeah.
And then there's just high ranking individuals with the companies who, if they decide to pay attention, now you have to please that person. So you end up in a position where it's like very quickly gets political. You're like, well, I'm gonna use this person because I know that like Sally likes this talent, and so like you start needing to like play those games. Whereas like, which is a skill on its own, it's fun. But like now today, working with these creators, I'm like, okay, like what does my client need? And because I've gone through kind of the wheel that I've gone through, was always working with branding agencies and companies who were rebranding a lot was kind of our niche.
Right.
And so like I really love to be like working with people who have really strong businesses or brands, but they might not have totally leaned into like how to
Right.
strengthen it through video. And it's really fun when I can like help someone create something that they're like, oh, that's me. And
Yeah.
it stops there. Like there's no other games to play after that. It's just like, hey,
Right.
they're happy
Yeah.
and that's what I get to see versus like trying to figure out how to trick this cook in the kitchen or that cook in the kitchen, you know?
Yeah. That makes
But
sense.
they're their own challenges and they're fun, but that's the big difference.
And what is the unexpected similarity?
That once you're making something, you're in Premiere Pro and you're making a video and that's it, you know? Like the problems you have to solve, like yes, there's the political, like use that man in the yellow shirt because people have liked him recently. There's that element, but like you're telling a story, whether you're making an ad for a Super Bowl or an hour-long video podcast, like the same strategy is everywhere. So no matter what I make, I follow the exact same process.
Got it. That makes
And
sense.
so that's the fun part is I don't change what I do. I just change the deliverable and who it's for.
Yeah. It's almost like the craft is exactly the same, but the pre and post process is different. In one, there are multiple stakeholders that you have to cater to. And in this case, there's one person. Have you noticed that when you were working with the bigger brands, it kind of also lowers the chance of you bringing out authentic work because there are almost so many check boxes or so many filters you have to pass before it becomes a product.
What's so interesting is I feel like what needs to happen, like when you do have to check all those boxes with the big brands, is like if there is like a truly like magical, amazing creative on that job, whether that's the creative director or the lead editor or producer, like they can rise above all those things and find a way to check boxes and keep it beautifully creative. And that's what my boss, my mentor of so many years, his biggest skill set was. He was like, yes, we have to do all these things and jump through all these hoops, but that doesn't mean we're going to water it down. And so that was always fun. It was just added to the riddle and the puzzle you get to solve.
Yeah.
Right. But like, yeah, there's totally a game to play that can water it down, has watered it down and worsened the creative. But there's also always that sign of like the strongest creative can like push through all sorts of boundaries.
Yeah. It's like creativity finds its way, like no matter how many restrictions you put, and if someone is intentional about it, they'll figure it out.
It's like the Jeff Goldblum quote, like life finds a way, you know?
Yeah. I wanted to say that, but I was like, I don't know if it really applies or I'm off on a tangent, but thank you for
there's always room for life finds a way.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And Jeff Goldblum.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I also love the fact that it is at the end of the day also dependent on people. Like if the creative director has that will to keep that beautiful creative in there, he or she will find a way, right? Another thing when you were talking about really piqued my interest is legal, and how you can run into legal troubles. I never thought of that, honestly. Maybe because I've not been in that industry. But do you have examples of where almost every other thing had been checked off, but the project didn't pass the finish line because of legal issues?
Yeah. And sometimes it's not always legal as much as it is like just sensitivities to the climate at that time. Right. The craziest one is very sad, but you might remember in like the late mid 2010s, like 2016ish, a boy was killed by an alligator at Disney World in Florida. Oh. He was at a float-in movie. They were like floating into watching a movie, and he was attacked by an alligator, and it was just absolutely gut-wrenching and so sad. But what ended up happening for us is at that point we were touching almost every creative marketing piece for Disney parks, which is like Disneyland Tokyo, Disneyland Paris, Disneyland Shanghai, California, and Florida.
Yeah.
We had to go through every single live piece of content and remove any time there was a child within like striking distance of an alligator in water. And it was just the craziest job. So we literally would like, even if it was a swimming pool, we'd have, and the kid was like being swung by his parents over the water. We were removing that and trying to like find the missing piece. It's like, okay, well, we lost like 7 seconds of this 30-second commercial. Like, how do you fix that story arc now?
That's crazy.
It was crazy. It was like, you know, it was like, I don't know the number, but somewhere between like 20 and 40 like live commercials that we were replacing 1 to 10 shots.
Oh my God. How long did that entire project take?
I feel like that was probably like it had to go quick because all these things were live, you know,
Right.
like literally live, like on like TVs and like being pushed out to the airwaves.
Right.
So we were like, it was as quick as possible. I feel like it was probably like a 2 to 3 week thing.
Oh shit. I thought you would have said like 6 months, 8 months. That's
no,
really...
it was like, we were like working like pretty brutally quick. It was 4 of us. And we were just like, all right, this commercial, all right, that commercial, next. Some of them would be one shot that you replace, and some were much larger. And then like on the brighter side, that's not so grim. Yeah, it would happen a lot. Like specifically with Disney, like if kid's doing 2 arms, like the arms would be like past a certain like angle, for lack of a better term, like you'd have to remove it. And most of the time you have these beautiful shots of a kid like laughing with their parents, but their arms go too high, and then it's like, nix it.
Oh wow. Okay. That's
things like that, you know.
Yeah.
Open, just all these sorts of random rules and things and checks and balances that they have gotten in trouble for, or there was a recent lawsuit in the park or something, and like those would always like come to bubble up to help us, not help us, to do the opposite of helping, to solve that new problem.
That makes sense. And it's crazy to think, because back then there was no AI that would crawl through all the video footage and identify, you know, sections that were problematic and flag it for you. You would have to manually go watch each one of it and figure out which ones are the problem sections.
Yes. And often like you finish a video and the last step's illegal, and like these 3 people that are like wearing suits sit behind you with a notebook and like watch the videos, and you're like, oh man, what are they going to find? And then sometimes you solve it with a picture. Sometimes you solve it with like 4 lines of a disclaimer at the bottom, and text no one's going to read. So
yeah, that makes sense. Oh, that's the whole disclaimer. That could be in the disclaimer section.
Yes.
You often see in videos. Okay, that makes sense. But in your work process, I'm guessing because it is the creative industry, you also worked with a lot of marketing folks, or they were also a big stakeholder in your process. How did that go? Was it they would give you briefs and you would work, or was it you both would come up with briefs together?
What was so amazing and what I felt so fortunate on is, so Disney always had amazing creative directors, obviously. And the conversation sounds very Disney forward, but it kind of goes with all the other companies. But like what we were so known for, our little group, we were called Fugitives. That was our brand name. And then we would literally just get a brief. Like they'd sit with us, like, hey, like there is a 6-week sale of this package, and this is the new ride in the area that we want to feature. And we knew the footage so well, they would basically give us copy and the call to action and let us do our thing. And then they would sit in after the first cut and spitball some ideas on how they might connect it better to the main message. And that was our process, which wasn't always the process, but we kind of like worked with them so long. We had such an awesome relationship, and they learned that if they gave us their best foot forward and then just let us run, and then we let them kind of tie the bow at the end, it was really fun. So there was hundreds of terabytes of B-roll, and which is hundreds of terabytes is probably like tens of thousands of hours of footage. And we organized the entire thing into these like very small nitty gritty little areas, and we just knew like, hey, we're doing this. We're going to use these folders to build this spot to serve these purposes.
That makes sense. And it's good to know that there was this partnership like relationship or symbiotic relationship where there was give and take, and it wasn't one directional. Like,
and it was also just in like any industry. I feel like what was so cool is like when you find someone you trust and you trust their skill set, is if you just give them their boundaries and you say, all right, run, like it gives you such great results.
I like that you touched on results oriented. As long as you're getting the results and you're in the playing field, things are good, right? How did you come up with those results? Or how do you decide that this particular campaign was successful versus that? Were there metrics for you? Did you have insight into marketing metrics? Was there overlap?
That's a great question. I honestly believe that when you're with those big brands, like all that stuff is percolating through. Like you never hear analytics, you never hear stats, but like most of the time, like you're given basically, like for like an analogy is like you're given a set of tools, and as long as you use those tools to build, it's like it's within the work, it's like it's gonna bleed through. But what's really interesting, because like we never heard stats like, oh, that ad, the click-through rate like wasn't that good. Like I never hear that with big brands. And I think that's because there's so many departments, like you just don't, because I remember when I first started working with smaller brands and I got to hear those things, I thought it was such a thrill to be like, oh wow, I can like hear what the performance is. But it goes to show like how much bigger brands have the budgets allow you to lean into creative work, and they care about that creative almost sometimes more because it builds the brand up. It might not sell, but it's like lifting up the brand.
You touched on such a great point, because that leads me to my next question. Do you feel like bigger brands or you didn't have purview into the metrics in bigger brands because they have more cash at their disposal that allows them to experiment more? And so metrics like CTR, even among the B2B world or smaller startups now, we're starting to realize that those are vanity metrics, right? Just because click-through rates are high, it doesn't mean that the conversion will be high, because the factors that affect both of them are different. So do you think it was the function of budget or cash that led bigger brands to not be as metrics driven as the smaller brands that you worked with later on?
So interesting is like, I really feel like when you're on a spot that's important with the big brands, when I say spot, like a video thing, like I think the main goal is, one, when there's budgets like NFL budgets or Disney budgets or even CNN budgets, I think like the main goal is, does this lift up the brand and will people feel something? And I think those like emotions are actually more important for them.
Yeah.
Like it's like Coke, like Coke sells you a feeling.
Yeah.
That's what they say. Like
and
there's some story where someone like tried to blackmail Coke because they got the ingredient, and the CEO was like, you can go make it yourself. Like you won't be selling them a feeling. You're selling them a recipe.
Yeah.
And so, but I really do think that's it. I think to like summarize that, it's like when there is that much budget and you're so big, I think it's the emotions that you can make someone relate to lift up your brand is I don't want to say more important, but is something that you can pay attention to.
That makes sense. Was that the only difference you saw working with bigger brands and smaller brands, or were there other things that took you aback? Like the CTR thing gave you a thrill. Was there anything else that was a noticeable difference or a learning curve?
Well, one, it's just like with those big companies, it really feels like it is, how good is this video? And good doesn't mean like, let's look at the statistics and figure out. It's like all these people who are very strong creatives are signing off on it. It's going to go. Whereas like there were some small businesses that I worked with and have worked with who, like, one of the most fun relationships I had, every week we had a meeting where we looked at the Meta ads feedback, and then we would iterate on that ad. And over the course of, like, we had 3 years together of doing literally that. Like once a week we met, we looked at how that last ad did, and over the course of 3 years we built these like modular pieces of ads and could like construct ads fully based off data that we like knew would work. Right. And we built this like awesome system, and it was not at all a video quality thing. It was like hacking numbers to build something, you know? So it was like the total opposite of the spectrum, but it was really fun and it was a beautiful thing. And we were like crushing all those fun metrics that are probably vanity metrics. And then the iPhone update happened and it all went out the door.
That makes so much sense. And it's also so fascinating. So when you say Meta ads, were you making ads for Meta or were they on the platform?
That was on the platform Meta. It was just for like a skincare brand. And they were advertising. All their ad spend was video advertisements on Facebook and Instagram.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. And I love that you touched on A/B testing for ads. First thing that stood out to me, 3 years, you know, like dedicating 3 years to a systematic approach where you meet every week. That takes a lot of patience. And what I want to ask you is, during those 3 years, was it like you started with a set of metrics and then over the time, you know, over the course of time, it evolved into a different set of metrics? How did you identify that these are the metrics you have to optimize for versus what you originally thought?
Yeah, no, it's good. It's fun because at this point I was brand new to all the acronyms, but the big acronym for them was ROAS, return on ad spend. And at first the CEO would pitch me a video once a week. Hey, we're going to focus on this. We're going to open up with this copy. We're going to use this picture. Here's the UGC footage. And we built a good working relationship over 3 years, to the point to where we were like, he would be like, well, what if we just like did a new version where we do exactly what we've done, but try to recreate it with our newer footage? And we would find like, oh, that worked. And so then it would be like, okay, they would go out and they get UGC footage that would kind of focus on those same touch points and topics and point of views. And we were able to just like say this and show the same things with new UGC footage. So we like basically had like a template, and we just like, it was amazing. You know, we'd be like, okay, well, let's just use that same 3 seconds that like everyone watches, and then we'll introduce this because we know they're going to get through it. So we just had all these formulas that were really awesome.
That's so fascinating to me, because the scientist part of a marketer's brain, it feels like you set off fireworks in my brain when you were talking about that. And I have so many questions there, but I'll try to like break them down and not throw multiple questions at you. One thing that I have learned from my very limited A/B testing experience compared to yours is you only change one thing at a time. See if that change really had the impact that, you know, it was supposed to. That I find that hard to achieve all the time, because let's say it's not a video ad, it's just an image ad, right? There's so many things that can be done different. Like if you change one thing, you still cannot be 100% sure that it was because of that one change. Because let's say I launch ad A on week 1, and then I take that, I iterate, I just change the headline in that image, and I run the second iteration on week 2. And now I'm like, okay, this is the exact same ad, same copy, just the headline's different, budget same, everything same. But in my head, I'm like, maybe there were more people surfing Meta during week 1 than on week 2. Maybe there was a change or there's a seasonality for the platform itself. So I psych myself and I'm like, I don't know if this was actually what made the difference or not. Did you face that? Because this was like on a much more complicated scale, right?
For better or worse, like I always have thought like at the end of the day, we're dealing with humans, and like that is an unpredictable area to deal with. And so like as formulaic as things be, like that gets the formula might get you in the ballpark. But at that point, there's, like with video, if you change one thing, like you can do that with an image. You can say, all right, let's change the copy. Let's make it purple, not yellow, or let's change the image or something of that nature. But I feel like with video, you're like passing a baton from one miniature section to the next, and you might change that shot, but now that baton pass is different and the vibes are different, the flow is different. And so like very often when we'd be asked to change one thing, like 6 things would change because we're like, well, we have to fix what happened when we changed that. Because there's like a chain reaction in a video that doesn't always exist in still image ads,
So for this, sake of sanity, we just focus on the things that we can focus on and attribute it there, because it's never going to be an exact science, because at the end of the day, it's humans you're serving it up to.
Yeah, I feel like it's like trying to like guess the weather. It's like, yeah, we have like a pretty good idea what's going to happen, but like,
yeah,
is it going to rain at 4:32 or is it going to rain at 6? Like, you're just never going to know those answers too much. Now, there could be people out there who have spent so much gross amounts of money and they have it figured out and they have their audience dialed in so much that they can answer things more accurately. But when you don't have that privilege of teams and research and data, you're dealing with humans, which is like you're dealing with the weather. It's organic.
That makes sense. Since it was a skincare brand, and let me know if this was not in your purview and you don't have an answer to that, was there seasonality attached to it? And did you see that affect your work? Because as a marketer, I can totally say holiday season is going to be crazy, so I'm going to have a couple, busy months leading up to it.
Big time. Yeah. Like right now, November is like you're hammering out massive amounts of volume, right?
Yeah.
And people you haven't worked with as a freelancer, companies you hadn't talked to in 2 years, all of a sudden right now they're like, hey, we need Black Friday, Cyber Monday ads. So yeah, things always get super crazy around now. And then ads in particular will then die off in January, which is when they say January is a lovely time to do your meta ads because everyone gets off the platform and costs go down a lot. But yeah, as a video editor, I've never really had a lot of clients solely in the meta ads world, but those clients who do operate solely on video content that are simply ads are pretty predictable. And as far as like timelines of when things are going to ramp up.
That makes so much sense. And you're so right in saying that, ad spend, I don't think it's just Meta, even LinkedIn and everywhere, the ad spend goes drastically down in January because everything just comes to a halt.
I'm like literally I finished some ads that took a long time to finish for my own business.
Yeah.
I finished them November 4th, which is 2 days before the election. And I decided to sit on them till January for a number of reasons. I had a couple things interrupting my life and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to wait. I'm not going to compete with people during this time. And I wasn't like, this is not the sole reason, but I had enough things putting up to where I was like, I'm just going to test this thing out in January and
that makes sense.
Get some cheaper spend.
Yeah,
and see how far it goes.
This was another question I wanted to ask you. In the B2B space, we see that ads need to show up in layers so that the first campaign is more so for them to warm up to your name, to hear it. And then the second one is more so educational. And then the third one's more geared towards conversion, because by then, hopefully, if the same people have seen your ads 2 or 3 times, they're like, okay, these guys are everywhere. I need to check them out.
Yeah.
Did you say something like that with the skincare brand, or even, I can't say the bigger brands, because bigger brands that you have worked with, literally everyone knows. So there's no problem of brand recall. But the smaller brands that you worked with, was the skincare brand the only one, or were there more?
There was more. That was the only one that was like, I mean, I've worked with like tens of companies in that space, but like that was the one who they were so awesome and unique and fun to work with because of the strategies they employed. And they would always have a really big awareness. Like most of their spend was in awareness. And then there was retargeting, I actually think the retargeting ads were like a high majority, I think were still ads because I didn't do all that many.
Okay.
That's my theory. So don't take me for that. But I did make retargeting ads, but so much of it was
Awareness.
awareness. But it's like the
Right.
same thing. I feel like that's why newsletters now are and podcasts even are so helpful because it's like what you were describing. It's like you have to stay top of mind.
Yes.
And you can, how do you stay top of mind? There's like all sorts of ways through traditional and non-traditional marketing to like
Yeah.
stay top of mind so that you can always be there. So when it's time to like pull the trigger for the person to say it's buy, you're in
Yeah.
their head when they're in that spending mood,
Yeah,
which
exactly.
is the trick.
That is true because things have gotten so noisy that before it was like, oh, we're going to launch an ad campaign and we're going to see how many leads we get. Right now, it's more like, how many eyeballs do we get? Because the goal of marketing now is to make sure they always remember you. The control of the decision making is more often than not in the hands of the consumers. So I can't
Mm-hmm.
force you to buy my product if you have no need for it. I need to make sure that I'm targeting the people who have the need for it. And
Mm-hmm.
even if they have the need 6 months out, I need to start now so that in 6 months they've gone through the customer journey and they're at the position to buy and pull the
Yes.
trigger. So
That's it's such a point too. Like, and it reminds me of like, there's so many times I'd be reached out by a company and they'd be making their first ad ever,
yeah,
and they'd always make one ad and never come back. Like you could always know, and you because such a big part is like you might as well just like fail on your first ad or your second or your third ad on purpose
yes,
in the name of like finding that audience that's going to connect.
that's
And then
true.
like what's the hook that's going to connect, and then you've spent all that like experimentation money and it's like, okay, now let's make our ad that costs
Yeah,
money.
exactly. Which is why when you talked about A/B testing for 3 years, I was like, wow, that's awesome because that's almost unheard of in the B2B space. Like the companies and the brands that I've worked with, they first of all know that paid ads is more like you adding fuel, like you adding kerosene to the fire. Like it's
Uh-huh.
basically turbocharging your efforts. It's not going to drive results, but it's just another layer you have to cover. But also, I don't know if that's completely true because nobody has A/B tested to the point where someone can take the whole journey or, that can prove it wrong. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So maybe there's something there.
And it
And
was just like their structure of their company. I feel like it was so awesome because it was a designer who would serve me beautiful graphics that I would then animate. It
Mhm.
was the CEO who was like always talking with customers and then like figuring out what was the talking point. And then there was, I don't know what the role was, but someone who was looking at ads and how they were performing. They were also the ones who were posting and doing the targeting. They were like the meta ads manager.
Right.
And so those four people working together for 3 years, like
Yeah.
makes good things happen. And then the iPhone update happens and it's all out the door.
Yeah. What happened there? I know about it, but like for our listeners, what was this infamous
It's
I
funny. Like I personally, this was just someone who was doing my job. I was like, all right, I'm making an ad like this. Like I'd hear the data and I'd work towards it. But I think what happened was it was that iPhone update that gave people the ability to
Yeah.
opt out of tracking. And I believe the results with this company in particular was all that work we had done.
Mm.
Like I forget the number, that ROAS that we were working towards, but like every ad was like hitting it. And then every now and then we'd have this unicorn ad that would like just
Surpass it.
be amazing. And you just run it for so long.
Mm.
Once that update happened, the ROAS just tanked. And it took what ended up happening here was things were going so well. They had just made some pretty significant hires to build out the team.
Mm-hmm.
And then suddenly there was inventory issues. And it was like that started costing money because it cost money to keep things on the shelves. And it was this like rippling effect of adding team members, sales not going as well. And it was a chain reaction for them that didn't go too well. It's crazy. Yeah, it was like pretty massive for me. I mean, I lost a client that was a pretty significant chunk of income for years.
Yeah. It was like the COVID for
Yeah,
before.
and then COVID happened not long after.
Yeah, exactly. But that was beautiful. That's amazing. But let me shift our focus to more recent um times, right? What made you launch Cut the Pod, and what are the changes you see in the industry that's prompting you to work in this space or help people in this space?
So yeah, it was fun because so COVID happened, and COVID, oddly enough, was an amazing time for me work wise. What ended up happening was I had a kid,
Mhm.
and suddenly I could work only 9 to 5. And so many of these big clients that I worked with, like just the nature of them, like it was very demanding. And it was like working late was really common for me. Working weekends was really common for me. Have a baby, those two things don't go together too well. And so I had to really look at what I was doing. And I was like, what jobs have I done the past 12 years that I enjoyed, were like not soul crushing, and were predictable in terms of like income? Because I often would have some months that were enormous followed by months that weren't, like the typical freelance lifestyle. I was like, how can I like solve all these things by focusing on a niche? And podcast answered all those questions. Like, people need videos on a recurring basis. They typically have a schedule they stick to.
Mhm.
And I can leverage those same relationships because no matter what I'm working on, I try to bring in the same 2 to 4 people that I love to work with. I was like, I want to keep working with these people that I like working with.
Hmm.
And I want to not work past 5 p.m. And I want to know what's going to happen in every month of the year and not rely on Black Friday, Cyber Monday stuff.
Yeah.
And that just answered, it was the one type of video that answered so many of my questions.
That makes sense. So
And
it was,
then, so go on. Yeah, sorry.
oh no, I was just gonna say it was driven by personal motives and goals.
Yeah, it was something that was going to be kinder to myself and financially great too, because it doesn't have ebbs and flows of seasons.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And sorry, I cut you off, but you were saying,
Oh, I was just saying there's so many videos that I do that weren't podcasts. They weren't called podcasts,
yeah,
but they were two people talking to each other. It's like, and one of my big strengths has always been working with interviews. And so it just kind of, and I enjoy it. So it just kind of folds into solving a lot of issues without creating a lot of stress.
that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, now that you are focused on podcasts, let me ask you this. At first, everyone is launching a podcast, or at
Yeah.
least like that's what there's a joke that, oh, are you even a 30 something year old if you don't have a podcast?
Oh,
Okay,
that's good.
right. That's one. The second one is that when a podcast has two guests or two people speaking to each other, it's more engaging versus one person talking to the audience. Is that true? And the first point too, everyone has a podcast. Is that true as well? And was that a driving force for this decision?
Everyone has a podcast. I'm going to say it's not true because I don't have one, and I'm an everyone, but I do have plans for one in the future. But no, I'm going to say it's not true. But I could make an argument there's a reason for everyone to do it, and it just, whatever you want it to be, it can be. It doesn't have to be a high-end production, which is where I focus in. So, and then the second part, remind me what that second part was.
It was more so like the two people having a conversation.
Oh yeah. No, okay. So that's really interesting because I want to say yes, because it seems like, it's much more interesting hearing conversation because it just seems more natural, right? It's just what we do as people is conversate. It seems like more societal and cultural.
Yeah.
But like, I feel like Dan Koe, if you're familiar with Dan Koe,
Yes.
like his whole thing was having a really strong philosophy, which is like the solopreneur, you are the niche. And he was one guy in his room in front of his computer, just sharing his thoughts.
Yeah.
And he had pretty cool graphics and stuff. And you could say that was a YouTube video, but you could also say that was a solo podcast. So it's almost like, how do you package it? Like, there's a client I work with now who does guest episodes, and then they do solo episodes. But actually, even though we call them solo episodes, like I consider them almost more of like thought leader videos versus like a podcast.
That's
So I almost feel like if you're making podcasts and you're like doing solos and guests, you can like repackage those solos to be whatever fits what you're trying to actually do. Like if you've got a big strong philosophy that you're pushing forward, like you don't have to call it an episode.
That's true. And that's making me rethink things, because there were 2 episodes where I didn't have a guest and I was freaking out, and I was like, oh my God, how am I going to do a podcast video? And so I created this whole AI thing that would talk to me, because I was so hell-bent on the fact that if it's 2 people, it's more engaging. And there was no data that I looked at. It was more so that's what I had heard. But you calling it a thought leadership piece just switched something in me, and I was like, yeah, that's possible too. Like, it depends on how you view it. So that was a great point. I feel like it was.
And I love what you did though with the bringing on the AI, because it's, especially now, like it's just so new and cool. It's like, well, what's that going to be like?
Yeah.
So
yeah, it was more so like, I can't call someone up at 12 a.m. on a
it's like, yeah, the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, phone a friend. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was the whole goal behind it. But I'm looking to experiment with that more. And that brings me to my next question. And I know we're almost at 45 minutes. I'm gonna wrap this up soon. Because the age of AI is taking off, have you seen any of your clients or anyone in the ecosystem that is using AI in a way that you hadn't thought of before? May it be post-production, pre-production, during like the production of it or editing, that's inspired you to look at things differently?
Well, one thing that's been huge, like selfishly just saying what I've done very recently that's been like massively eye-opening, is creating my own, I call them GPTs. I know some people call them agents.
Yeah.
What do you call them?
I interchange between the two.
Yeah.
Whatever feels natural that time.
Yeah, like I like agents. It sounds more cool and sleek and fancy. But so I have for each of my podcast clients, I kind of have the same prompt that I build, which is just general like decent YouTube strategies through some like PDFs I've purchased or bought or gotten for free that I feel like are like my like foundations. And then I will feed that GPT to know the brand, like who they are, what their offer is, how they talk, and like feeding them, you know, their writing and their brand colors and fonts, and then giving some examples of YouTube channels and how they name and tag things. So they have like strong reference, understand the brand, and then strong foundation. And then I have one per client of mine that I'll use when we're creating new videos to help ideate anything from like titles to descriptions to thumbnail ideas, like all that jazz. And so I just have one per client. And so it's been really kind of helpful.
It's like a brainstorming buddy.
Yes. Yeah.
Sounds.
And the other cool one is I met with someone recently who does practice sales calls. And every sales call they have, they record a transcript.
Yeah.
And then they just upload that transcript to the GPT. And so the GPT just keeps getting to know those people more and more that they speak with.
Yeah.
And then he practices sales calls on the desktop app.
That is so smart.
Yeah. I haven't tried it myself, but it's on my to-do list.
Yeah, that is very smart. I think I'm gonna like steal that away and add it to my notebook.
Oh yeah, I'm planning on it. I'm literally have a post-it over here that says to do it. So
it is very smart. Okay, awesome. I think that's all the questions I have.
Can I ask you really quickly?
Yeah.
Do you have anything new in the AI that's
anything new in the AI space? No. I'm more so was interested in the whole how can it be a guest sort of thing. And so I think that's the one angle that I have tested out. But what I did last week, and I don't know if you got a chance to see it, was I took Duolingo's brand and I fed it in, and I was like, I want to have a chat with this brand. So I'm going to make that into a series of banter with the brands, because
banter with the brands. That's a really great name.
Thank you, thank you. So it's B&B, blunders and
Ooh,
breakthroughs,
ooh.
BB. Yeah, so I'm gonna do that just because I want to understand the nuances of brand building for myself. Because now everyone is understanding that it's a creator economy, and
Yep.
everyone's gonna rush into that. So there needs to be a way you can stand out. So it's my way of learning from the most famous brands. Um, that's one. And the second one would be more so around YouTube keywords. That's a very
Mm,
new space to me. I don't know how to optimize. I know it's a search engine in and of itself and it needs some optimizing, but I have no clue how to do it. So I've been feeding it information and helping me come up with titles and stuff that will attract eyeballs.
that is exactly what I was doing this morning. And I have a really close friend who works in SEO, and he's run an SEO agency for like over a decade, and he's like transitioning his whole business to YouTube.
Oh, wow. Okay. I think there's a lot there because it's not focused on by most SEO experts. They do Google and all of that, but
Yeah.
YouTube is
Yeah.
most for
That's
public.
smart though. I'm working on trying to be smarter about those keywords. It's pretty
It's not
it's
easy.
tr- it's not easy. Yeah. It's not that you get a whole blog post to like shoehorn and dovetail in these
Yeah,
words. You have to be so strategic.
exactly. Exactly. It's like, what's your title? What's even your thumbnail apparently matters a lot when it comes
Oh,
to keywords. And I was like, oh, I did not know that. And
huh.
the description needs to be filled with, and I was like, this is a whole new ball game. And for someone who's trying to grow in the YouTube space or even short video space for reels and shorts, like this is a whole new world in and of itself, and there's a learning curve involved. So yeah, because when you're putting so much work into generating a video, you want it to perform well.
You want to do your best. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. But yeah, that's what I'm working on. And you just made me realize that I have a bunch of to-dos in that space, so which I'm gonna get to after this. But to close off our conversation here, I love to ask this to everyone. Two questions. What's next for you? And what's the one blunder and one breakthrough you've had in the past week?
Ooh. Okay. What's next is I'm gonna, oh man, what is next? That's such a good question. I have a bunch of things, but I'm gonna say right now is my YouTube channel. Like I'm about to open that up. I've been like thinking
Nice.
and strategizing on my own for a while so that I can walk the walk and talk the talk. Being someone in the podcast space without a podcast, I soon will not be that person.
Nice.
So I'll be one step closer to being a true 30 something year old. And yeah, so that's next. So I'm gonna do a podcast. I'm gonna call it Host to Host, and the whole idea will be hosting podcast hosts as guests.
That's such a smart name. Host the host. I love it.
So that's next, and that'll come with a litany of other YouTube videos. So that's my big goal. I'm holding myself accountable with.
Nice.
Blunders, two that stick out is getting to podcast. I stuck with two. I dove neck deep into two other niches before I got here, and one of them was e-commerce ads. So I spent like 6-7 months going all in on a business that was just doing that. Got a little success and I realized I really don't like this. It's not fun. There's stress. There's big timelines. There's people who are new that don't understand the creative process or even care about it.
Yeah.
So I jumped off of that and I jumped into sports because I had done a lot of work with the NFL. I love sports. And then I found out, and I spent another 8 months building that out, the whole business with that. And I thought, making something around my passion was going to be such a great idea. And I learned that passion can be really dangerous because you are seeking perfection and you have this fuel that is detrimental to your health almost.
Yeah.
And so I would find myself waking up at 2 and being like, I have such a good idea, and going and executing on that idea.
Yeah.
And I was not being kind to myself from a health perspective. And it was solely due to my inability to control my passion. I just wanted whatever I was creating to be the best it could possibly be. So I stopped on that. And so those are like two blunders. And the breakthrough was like landing on podcast where it's, oh my goodness, I can do something that I can leverage all the experience I have. I can work with all the people I like to work with. And I solve those issues that I had blunders on previously, on finding those niches that are going to solve those problems in my life.
That makes so much sense. Yeah, I love that. That's so profound, and that was a beautiful way to just, you know, end this conversation. And I feel like I learned so much, but I also feel very enlightened in this
Oh,
conversation because we touched on so many different things that not only have to do with profession, but also with personal space and how to manage things and how to move from one thing to another. So that was really it also fed my soul a little. So that's beautiful. Thank you so much for this conversation. I know I kept you.
right back at you. Seriously, it was fun. It was enlightening. It was healthy.
Thank you.
And here's to keeping good things staying good and not doing too much of them.
Yeah, yeah, that's balance. Striking the balance.
Balance. There it is.
That's another B word. I feel like I'm surrounded.
Blunders, balance, and breakthrough. It doesn't go off the tongue as well.
No, no. But I think blunders and breakthroughs is enough. But
It's a nice balance there. Yeah.
yeah, that's true. That's true. Anyway, thank you so much, George. This was wonderful.